morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. I greet you live from the All America city of Morrisville in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States of America. This week, we're preparing for Mother's Day on Sunday, and it's been a crazy year. On the show, we talk about political turbulence, economic turbulence, innovation as AI and ChatGPT are changing the way we work. They're also changing professions, and we're going to talk about AI almost every month because I think it's something that is really accelerating a significant change in our society. But today I want to get together with you all and talk about some major issues. First of all, it's Victory Day. President Putin gave a speech today. Victory Day is the day that celebrates the defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945. But because of drone attacks, they've tightened up security and it's a little bit quieter than usual. We'll have Sasha Starr talk about that. We also know that today, a very important meeting happening in Washington, as President Biden will be meeting with congressional leaders as the United States of America is 3 weeks away from defaulting on the debt. The Republicans want him to cut spending cuts, and it's once again checkmate, stalemate. It happens every year. Probably they'll end up raising it again. But we'll talk about why this continues to happen, and is it almost like just kind of a ceremonial act that they do this every year. We're going to run out of money. We're running out of money, and then boom, more debt. One of Greenland's largest glaciers is melting faster than expected. The Petermann Glacier is thinning by as much as 250 feet a year in some places, a new study found. And we are all bearing the, unfortunately, if we're binging on Netflix or looking forward to that next show, the writer's strike has a lot of us concerned. Can't get Saturday Night Live. Stranger Things is now on hold. I'm on season 4 of The Mandalorian, but I've only watched 2 episodes, so at least I can watch that as I stream Star Wars on Disney. But the writer's strike is serious, and it will affect many shows that many of us get to watch. We're going to go ahead and get started today. I had a great trip to Washington, and I'm going back next week. But here, let's go ahead and bring in our guest for a great show. Welcome to World Edition. Let's get started.
Steve, what are some of your highlights for Washington?
Well, the Congress wasn't in session, so our Senate was in session. So I met briefly with Senator Booker, but from New Jersey. I think one of the things I've noticed is that it's just gotten so divisive. I mean, it's gotten to the point where the Republicans and Democrats, they don't talk to each other, and most of the work is really done by the staffs. That's the other thing, because even though they were out of session, all the congressional staffs were there working hard, kind of doing their thing. And so I think that, that was my takeaways. I mean, it's a bustling city, a lot of activity, but, I think unfortunately the money and the influence of outside money has just put our congressional delegations and Senate delegates in such a position that they're always running for office. At least the U.S. Senate is 6 years. But U.S. Congress is only 2. So by the time you get in, you're already running again for the next term.
Yeah. So, Steve, when it comes to this debt ceiling limit issue, here's the way I understand it, and the media does a horrible job explaining it. That the thing is, the Republicans want to negotiate the 2023 budget, the current budget, and as opposed to the 2024 budget, which hasn't been passed yet. And so what they're trying to do is to basically, because remember, they weren't in office. The Republicans were not in office when the 2023 budget was passed. So what they're trying to do is to create a cram down, I guess you would call it, on the 2023 budget. And they're using the debt ceiling limit to do that. But what they're really doing is they're fighting the 2023 budget. The punt job is, the way I understand this also, is to go ahead and approve the 2023 budget, which, by the way, Congress already approved, but it was a different Congress. And then negotiate the 2024 budget in October to reestablish the line, so to speak, on the debt limit. But the media glosses this over very quickly and doesn't explain it very well, which I find troublesome because that affects everybody in the country. In other words, the debt limit and the amount of borrowing. Now, the other problem that we have with the debt is this, and somebody rolled this stat back, and I was going, no, this can't be true. Houses, everybody has a mortgage on their house, right? If you took all the homes in America and you put them in a lump sum together, the national debt is 2 times larger than all the mortgages in the United States combined. Now, that's a very serious amount of money that the U.S. is in debt right now. In other words, 31 trillion is not chopped liver, as Sasha would say, right? Okay, not chopped liver. Okay, I mean, you're talking some very serious money, and we do need to get the House in order. And why is it that the Democrats and the Republicans can't figure this out? I don't see this as rocket science. Anyway, we have a guest, so I guess we'll try to be nice and not have Daniel involved in the food fight, and we can get involved in the food fight later on the debt ceiling limit. So we'll have to.
Mark, introduce our guest, please. Daniel, go ahead and introduce yourself to the team here.
Yes.
Glad to introduce Daniel and everything in that space. Like I said, Daniel is a very talented individual. He's got a book called Agents of Grace and All in That Way. And he is definitely very much involved in the space of the evangelical movement and all in that space. So he was a former member, and I don't know if he's still a member of the National Religious Broadcasters and all along those lines, and has definitely been taking some leadership roles in the Christian movement and thoughts around abortion, around vaccines, and a number of other issues, but is definitely thinking that even with Roe versus Wade, that the church needs to have some conversations about the direction it's going. But I'll let Daniel speak to that, and then I may have some questions for him, and I'm sure you will have some questions as well. But this is definitely glad to have Daniel Darling with us, who has definitely been involved in that evangelical movement for a number of years.
Well, thank you, and glad to be part of the conversation. Yeah, I'm a pastor and an author, and right now I lead the Land Center for Cultural Engagement at Southwestern Seminary here in Fort Worth. I served as vice president at the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission for about 8 years. I also was a senior VP at the National Religious Broadcasters, and I've pastored. And I have a new book releasing today. It's called Agents of Grace: How to Bridge Divides, Love as Jesus Loves, talking about Christian unity. Anyways, I write for World Magazine, USA Today, a bunch of other places. So anyways, glad to be part of the conversation.
Fantastic, Daniel. I guess we'll open it up to the panel to ask any questions. I think the most concerning thing is just a lot of times we talk on the show about how turbulent and divisive the world is. So I don't know if you have any insights of how, as a man of faith, what your advice is of how we can all try to get along better. It just seems to be a very divisive world today.
Yeah, I think we're in a very polarized age. We are in. There's a really good book by a guy from Australia called A Non-Anxious Presence, and he talks about how we are in the sort of gray zone right now between two eras. This is a very disruptive time, similar to the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the printing press. You have the digital age, digital revolution. So the way we communicate is different. It's never been easier to express yourself than it is today. That's both good and bad. It's leveled the playing field, but it's also elevated a lot of voices. And there's just this plus the global pandemic and a number of other things is really kind of disruptive. And so it's really disrupting almost every institution in American life. The church is no different. There's been a lot of division among Christians as well. And so, yeah, I think, from when you zoom out to like an American perspective, we have to ask ourselves, how do we live with our convictions and our deeply held values, but also live together side by side. As a Christian, we have deep convictions about human flourishing, about the sanctity of human life, about the way that we feel that is best for human flourishing. We also agree, that we're to love our neighbors ourselves. So even when we disagree with our neighbors, we live with them side by side. And I think that's really important for us. I think things are, I'm hopeful, I'm deeply concerned about American polarization, but I'm also hopeful in some ways, because when you look in communities around the country, away from cable news, away from, social media, people are actually finding ways to work together. And that's hopeful in local communities, but we definitely are very polarized as a society, and it is concerning.
Okay, well, we can throw you some of the tough questions since you're in Texas. What are your thoughts about immigration at the border? I mean, if you have a philosophy, love your neighbor, but you can't join me in my country, what are your thoughts about the immigration at the border issues?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think, we have to think two things at the same time. I think the first, a country does have to secure their borders. A country has to have secure borders. We have to know who's coming into the country, both for national security purposes and just for a number of other reasons. And so the country has a right to secure their borders. I think our immigration system is a big mess right now, going back, decades. And so we really have to get a handle on that. That means we need more investment in border security. The people at the border are overwhelmed. We also need, but it's a multi-layered problem. And what I think is we need to do two things at the same time. We really need to update our immigration system and open up more legal pathways for people to come into this country in a measured way. Believe it or not, it's actually hard to immigrate to the United States legally, unless you have, a family tie, or you are sort of, in some of the high skill sets, Silicon Valley and other places. If you're a blue collar worker, it's really hard to get in the country. There's only so many openings for that, and we actually need more of those folks. So we need to open up more legal pathways. I think another reason for that is, our birth rate is declining in America, and so we need immigrants. Immigrants as a whole generally are a net benefit to a country. I'm saying legal immigrants. They have intact families. They have, they're conservative in terms of their social values, which appeals to me as a social conservative. They're highly religious. Many of them are either Catholic or evangelical when they come into this country. So I think we need to open up more legal pathways, but at the same time, really seal the border so we stop the flow of legal immigration, of illegal immigration, right? So both of those at the same time. But the problem is, I think in both sides, both parties, really, there's an incentive not to fix the issue. Both parties want to run on this issue for different reasons. And so there's not an incentive to actually fix this problem. I also think we have to be invested in the countries around us. As countries in our hemisphere collapse and create these unstable environments, you're going to have people coming to the border. We really do want to see these countries stable. And on the one hand, we have great prosperity, great opportunity here. So we want to welcome a limited amount, but some of, you're tired, you're poor, as it says in the Statue of Liberty. But we also don't want to create incentives for people to come here that destabilize those other countries, right? So as everyone flees those unstable countries and comes here, so it's a really complex problem requiring leadership that we haven't really not seen at the national level. And, I think we have to sit down and say, okay, what can we do to solve this? How can conservatives and liberals sit down together and solve this problem? It's going to take a bipartisan effort. It's going to take acknowledging reality that we can't just let people walk through the border. We can't let illegal immigrants just come in here. It's not good for our country. It's not good for them. It incentivizes the cartels. It incentivizes the traffickers and all that. We can't do that. At the same time, we have to figure out a way. How do we have a good system for processing legal immigrants who would be a benefit to our country, and we can track and see who's here. So very complex.
Yeah, the reason I want to give you those questions, as I sent it to ChatGPT, they don't answer me very well. So I figured you could replace
Hey,
that.
Daniel, Daniel, along those same lines, the church has got some serious criticism recently and in the past for the way it has treated the homeless and all in that space. I was just wondering, as an evangelical Christian, what your thoughts are as to how we can better deal with the homeless situation. It is definitely something that exists in Texas, North Carolina, California, a variety of other places. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about it.
That's a great question. And look, the homeless issue is also a multi-layered, complicated issue. I think the first thing I would say is Christian ministries are actually doing a lot with the homeless. Everywhere you see homeless populations, you see Christian ministries taking in homeless, helping the homeless. We can obviously do more. But I think what's ironic, if you actually look at if you look at history, and historians have said this, even historians who are not religious or not Christians have said, the very idea of caring for the poor comes from Christianity. Tom Holland, who's a historian, not a Christian, and some others have said that so Christianity in some ways is judged by an ethic that's borrowed from Christianity. But in terms of the present day problem, I think you're right. I mean, there's much more we have to do. I think it's multi-layered though, and you can track some of the rise in the homeless population with the decline in really good mental health services. Back in the 20th century, there was a pendulum shift in the terms of the way we treat people who have significant mental health issues, that away from institutionalizing people. And look, in the 20th century, especially the early part, that was abused, right? People were institutionalized against their will, experimented on all those things. But the pendulum shifted to the point where, a family or friends who recognize that someone is mentally unstable, they can't do anything to help them and get them institutionalized because of requires consent on the part of that person. And so a lot of these folks, instead of being in a mental health institution getting good care, are on the streets. There's nowhere for them to go. And we have friends and family that have had situations like that. So it's a mental health issue. We need more mental health institutions. It's a huge need. I mean, we need to build a lot of these places, have good care. We need to have ways for family members to commit people who clearly cannot make decisions for themselves. And then we need, compassionate care for the homeless and be able to find some care for many of them. It's a multi-layered issue. I think as inflation continues to spike, we're going to see more of it. It's in a lot of our urban areas and even suburban areas. The cost of living being so high has made it just hard for people to survive and hard for people to get by. So I think it's a really difficult issue.
Yeah, and another thing on that issue. Okay, in New York, there was a recent person who looked to be homeless. He may have been starving, and rather than just give him $10 and say, "Hey, go to McDonald's and get a breakfast" or something like that, the people on the subway strangled him because he was. Now,
Nick, you're being disingenuous.
Yeah, you are.
What do you mean I'm being disingenuous?
They didn't
That's not what happened.
strangle him because he's homeless. They didn't strangle him because he was hungry. They didn't even strangle on purpose. They restrained him. Unfortunately, he died. But 3 or 4 people restrained him because he was threatening people.
Yeah, right. Okay, but the thing is, okay, if
The
you
fact
look
that
at
he was homeless and hungry was
first of all,
irrelevant.
Lee, we don't know the facts of the case.
The
okay?
facts of the
Well,
case.
no,
are he's been
neither do
arrested.
you. I mean,
Nick,
you.
But you
He's been
guys are
arrested
jumping in.
40
You guys
times.
are being presumptive. I'm sorry.
There's a
Okay?
You
video.
are being
Watch the video.
presumptive.
Subways of New York. I lived there for 5 bloody years. Okay.
Yeah.
But the
live there
thing
now.
is, what happens is on the subways is so different. That happens in Utah or wherever the heck you guys are living in. All right. So now the thing is, you
Yeah.
have a person.
He lives in New York.
Yeah, he lives near New York, not Manhattan. Manhattan's a whole different cat, okay, than being in the burbs. All right. So now the thing is, you have somebody who is obviously suffering from stress, okay, and this is typical New York. Rather than say, okay, here's $10, go get something to eat, they will sit and ignore it, and then 3 vigilantes jump on him, strangle him, and is that the Christian response? So I'm addressing this to Daniel. As a Christian, would you give him money, or would you say, I'm just going to ignore the situation, let the vigilantes go ahead and jump him, and we get the result that we just had?
Well,
ignore mental illness, ignore hunger, because I'm a Christian. I'm going to ignore it and just let the guy get jumped, and I'm good with it. So,
Well, I'm sorry, Daniel. Before
question.
you answer, I just want to add: he's been arrested over 40 times. Clearly, the system
Yeah, of
failed
course
him.
they have. Come on, Lee. You're presenting facts that are irrelevant. Okay.
No, they're not.
No, you
He
are.
should not have been on the
Nick.
streets.
You haven't dealt with mentally ill people.
Hold on a second. Let's hear Daniel's
They get
response and
arrested
everything.
for not showing up to court. They get arrested
For
for
kidnapping,
minor crimes.
assault,
Okay,
smashing
you know,
elderly
you're
lady
not
face
looking
in.
at the problem because you don't know jack about mental illness. Okay, a mentally ill person does get arrested a lot.
Hold on a second. Let's hear from
Come on
Look,
now. Just let Daniel.
I would say
So I want to hear from the Reverend.
I would say it's a
because
complicated. That case is actually fairly complicated because in some ways you're all right. On the one hand, you know, the system clearly failed this guy because, again, had we had really robust care for mental health issues, he might be in a mental health institution where he can get good care. He could be safe. He can have, at the same time, he was a danger and a threat to people on the subway. I'm not saying what happened was right, and to him, I think, but people, he had attacked people on the subway. People want to feel safe on the subway. It seems like the mental health institutions, the police, and everyone, in some ways, failed him and the people who were there. The whole situation is really sad and a kind of an indictment on our society that we don't have care for people who really need care, and we can't keep people safe in places like the subway where people have to go to work. As a Christian, when I approach someone, just to zoom out from this, when I approach someone on the street and they need money, I used to have a response where I'd say, I don't want to enable someone. I don't want to give them money because they're going to go use it on substances and stuff. I've really changed that. I've just said, look, if I have money and I can do this, I give them money, and what they do with that is between them and the Lord. But if I can help, I try to help. But it really is the fact that this guy has been kind of a punching bag as people try to score points on both sides. It's really sad because really he was just failed by the system. He should have been in a home or an institution that can care for him. Instead, he's left to sort of just do his thing, and he's a danger to people on the subway in many ways. So people rightly are defending themselves, but then it goes too far. And it's really sad. The whole situation is sad, and it just highlights our need for, a society. You can look and see what we value by who we leave behind. And increasingly, we're a society that, we're failing those people that really need help.
Hey, Daniel, along those same lines, Reverend Barber, who is actually a family friend and has actually done the whole Poor People's Campaign, and I know that he is probably on the opposite side in some ways of your own political leanings and everything, but he does talk sometimes about the poverty aspect and how a lot of times we don't even have within our congregations sermons around poverty and the least of these. So I'm just wondering your response to folks like Reverend Barber that bring up the fact that they've heard of studies of thousands of sermons, and unfortunately that is not something that is advocated as much as it probably could be from within the walls of the church and everything. So I'm just wondering your thoughts about that.
I think that's fair. I mean, I disagree. As you mentioned, I disagree with Barber in terms of his political approach. I think we could talk much more about poverty and poverty relief. I do think we do have to ask ourselves not just how do we care for. We need to not just challenge ourselves to care for the least of these and care for those in poverty, but what's the most effective way to do it? Because and good people disagree on that, and I don't necessarily accept the narrative that liberals care for the poor and conservatives don't, and vice versa. I think what we're having is not a debate about should we care for the poor. We're having a debate about what is the most effective way of caring for the poor, and good people disagree. I think most conservatives will say we do believe there is a role for the state to have a safety net, have a thing that can help people. But I think conservatives would say let's make sure that safety net is lifting up people that truly need help, and also providing a kind of a step up so that people can have an opportunity to thrive. rather than sort of, disincentivize the kind of things that are good behaviors, in order to get ahead. And it's complicated, and I think that narratives have changed too. A lot of conservatives today are talking about maybe the state needs to do more to help families flourish, that, parents trying to make it work on two incomes, and what are things the state can do to help cushion and help families thrive. Because, when families thrive, when the building block of the family thrives, society thrives. So I think it's a good conversation. Well, what is effective? We don't just want compassion, and we don't just want help for the least of these. We want to do it. What's the best delivery system? I think the same way about healthcare. I think we all should agree that everyone should have access to quality healthcare if they get sick. What is the best delivery system? What mix of public and private partnerships are the best way to ensure that everyone gets cared for? And I think there's a good conversation and a good disagreement about those things.
I know one of the other things that you've talked about, and there are two things that you've talked about that have been very controversial, and I'm definitely going to bring both of them up, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about them, because I know that you've definitely had some very interesting thoughts about Roe versus Wade and the reversal and the Dobbs decision, and what you think the direction that we should go. And it sounds like that if you head your way, that eventually we will have no abortions in the country, and all in that space. And if I'm speaking out of school, you can definitely correct me. I'm not above being corrected, and all in that space. But where do you think we are, and where do you think we should be going?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am pro-life. I've made I've not hidden that. I've been a pro-life activist for most of my life. In fact, a lot of my entrance into politics and culture is because of that issue. I think the pro-life movement has for 50 years, imperfectly, of course, but it has changed America's moral vocabulary so that even those who disagree with us will acknowledge that every life matters, every human life matters, that life at its most frail, at its most vulnerable, at its most dependent, that life has value, that the human, and really what the question is with abortion, there's a lot of issues around it. But the real question is this a human life inside of the womb? Is that a human being? Is that a person with their own DNA, their own heartbeat? Is that a person who, is that a person? And, scriptures have told us, we're guided by scripture that, King David said in Psalm 139 that, you knit me in my mother's womb. The unborn person in the Bible has personhood. Genesis 1 and 2 talk about every human being is made in the image of God, has dignity and value, regardless of their worth. Jeremiah, God knew Jeremiah before he was born. All those things. So we're guided by scripture, but increasingly science is affirming what we have believed, that at early ages, we know, and I think instinctively as a culture, we know there's a baby there, right? If a celebrity couple announces that they're pregnant, what do we say? What do the headlines say? So-and-so is expecting a baby. So-and-so is pregnant with a baby. They even talk about their baby. They name their baby. We know there's a human being there. And so the pro-life community has said, hey, that baby, regardless of how they were conceived, doesn't deserve to die. They deserve to have life. Now, there's a great conversation about how do we create the conditions so that mothers in crisis, that's not the only choice that they face. What are ways that we can get around mothers? And you're starting to see pro-life communities do that with the reversal of Roe. A lot of pro-life governors have been passing, along with strict pro-life laws, they've also been passing things that help mothers with their babies. The state helping with, some states have said that, hey, Medicaid should start at the moment of conception so that there's all that coverage. Or how can we help once they have their baby with a basic essential needs? And so I think that's a conversation that needs to happen too, that how do we help mothers who choose to have their babies and families who choose to have their babies? How do we help them flourish? How do we help them after they're born? and to have a flourishing life. And I think that's an important and good conversation. But, you know, I think we can celebrate. I mean, I think if you think 50 to 60 million babies have been, and that may be a high estimate, have been aborted since Roe. You know, I think that's a moral stain on the country. All those lives extinguished. And, you know, so I think laws are not the only thing that's going to reduce abortion. There's a lot of other things that we need to do, but I think laws can help reduce them. So that's kind of my position. I know folks disagree with that. I'm sure many on this panel do, but
well, the other thing I was going to ask you really quickly, and then that's the other issue I was going to get to, and then definitely want to hear from the rest of the panel, is I also know that you had some very interesting stances, and Lee may be interested in hearing this one, when the vaccine first came out. And I know that you were actually one of the few pastors that actually came out in support of the vaccine and all in that space. So I just wondered, is that still the case, and what are your thoughts as we are entering out of the pandemic? Because I know that was part of what was going on in your association with the religious broadcasters.
yeah, well, that's a great question. Well, you know, the vaccine has divided a lot of folks. You know, I understand why people were skeptical because it was new. Trust of all of our institutions is at an all-time low, right? Medical field, the church, every institution in American life is suffering from a deficit of trust because, you know, many of them have failed us in the last 10 years and there's just no trust. So when a new vaccine comes out, of course, there's going to be not a lot of trust. You see the skepticism on both sides when it first came out, right? I mean, in the debates in 2020, you know, Vice President Harris and even Biden said, you know, if it's a Trump vaccine, I don't trust it. And he's going to rush it because of politics. And then once it came out, you have conservatives that were distrustful. So I get why people are skeptical. I get today why people are skeptical and have said, you know, I'm nervous about this. So I think the shaming of people about it was really counterproductive. I chose, you know, our family chose to take it, at least the first initial doses, just because we felt, I watched the development of it, you know, and, you know, however you feel about Trump, if you love him or hate him, you know, he doesn't seem like someone that accepts conventional wisdom. He obviously shepherded that through, and not alone, but he was for it. So I think, and I watched some of the development and everything. Obviously, some of the claims that were made of what it would do were maybe overstated. So I get why people were nervous about that. But I was for it. I felt like protect me and my family, and it could protect people. We had people close to us die from COVID. We had a piano teacher that we lost who was in her 50s, and this was before the vaccine was available, otherwise healthy. You know, it was a real blow to our family, close friend. We had people die that we knew. And so I was for it. So in generally, we're for vaccines, you know, when it comes to, we feel like they save lives when it comes to the normal vaccines that children get. I've been to developing countries that wish they had our vaccine regimen because people die of preventable diseases like polio and chickenpox and all those other things that we now just sort of take for granted that we don't die from here. So I'm generally for those things.
Daniel, I want to thank you for being with us. I have to leave early today, but I just wanted, Sasha, could you just make a quick statement about V-Day in Russia before we leave?
Yes, I may do that. What's happened is that the D-Day, so-called, for the victory of Allied forces in Europe, the peace, or should I say surrender, unconditional surrender of Germany, was arranged exactly on May 7th. On May 8th, there was execution of the documents with Eisenhower, de Gaulle, Churchill present, and one Russian representative. And it was signed from the German side by Admiral Jodl. The funny thing is, when Jodl was signing surrender to US, England, Russia, and then when France came up, he asked, did we lose to France as well? Well, the answer was, yeah, it's happened. Yes, we lost to France. Okay, I'll sign. Now, Stalin was infuriated that Yodel, in his opinion, was not high enough in Germany's hierarchy, and he insisted that it should be a higher representative from Germany to sign. And when asked, he said that General Cato. Okay, so also they changed to appease Stalin, signing on May 8th. It was signed by 11 p.m. with all sides. Now, 11 p.m. is happened to be already 1 a.m. next day in Moscow, which is May 9th. So therefore, all Soviet Union celebrated victory on May 9th and all civilized world on May 8th. Now, the new countries such as Kazakhstan, Ukraine, many others, they made a decision that from now on, they're going to celebrate it with the rest of the world on May 8th. So May 9th is a fiction only for Russians. And once they will be defeated, there will be no more May 9th
and it's
celebration.
there were concerns about drone strikes and things, so it's been real quiet. Well, I'm going to leave you with our guest today. Just wanted to get that out there. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about Mental Health Awareness Month a little bit because it is an issue, and of course, recent Texas shooting, 22 gun shootings since the beginning of 2023, almost every week. And I'm going to take up Sasha Starr's challenge on yesterday's show. He says, "Why don't we come up with a week when there's no gun shootings, which will make it a lot easier to track than talking about a gun shooting every day." 22. So I'll be back tomorrow. Thank you, Reverend Pastor, for being with us. And we'll be back tomorrow for another edition. Thank you all so much.
You know what can happen? That if the shooters will go on strike like Hollywood writers, there will be no shooting for some period of time.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a
could
good
be an
idea.
idea and everything. Hey, Daniel. Yeah, Daniel, just really quickly, there have been a lot of people on both sides of the politics that are not exactly pleased by what is looking like it is going to be a rematch because of the age of the candidates and some of their views as well. So as one that is I would argue probably a younger leader and all in that space, what is your thoughts about the leadership that we have, and are there better choices on both the left and the right? Because I do know that a lot of people are not excited about a 80-year-old man going up against a person that is in their late 70s and all in that space. But I'm just wondering your thoughts, because I've also heard you speak about the charismatic leadership that is coming out of the churches and how a lot of that is not being recognized. I did read one of your articles where you were talking about the youth movement that is taking place in the evangelical church and all in that kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, as a Gen Xer, I will happily say, hey, the boomers had their time on the stage. Can we get some younger options for president? I do think I talked to a lot of people on both sides of the aisle. I'm a conservative, obviously, and I vote that way typically. But a lot of people on both sides are just saying, hey, we have 300 million Americans in this country. Can we get better options for a president? And, we'll see what happens if it ends up being Trump and Biden. But I think this may be the election where we're getting a choice between two people that really nobody wants. I mean, if you look at the recent poll that I think NBC did, that a majority of Democrats even think that Biden's, shouldn't be the nominee, that he's too old, that he's, we need somebody else. A majority of Republicans think Trump is similarly too old, should make room for someone else, that maybe he's, committed crimes. I mean, there's all that sort of polling. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think the Republican primary thing is wrapped up. I think it could be a spirited battle. Just having watched presidential politics for a number of years, I don't know that that's a given thing. Year out, we thought a lot of people were going to be the nominee, and they weren't throughout history. On the Democratic side, it does seem like Biden is running, but stranger things have happened. You think of 1968 where LBJ bowed out, or you think of other times, but it will be interesting. I think this will be, if it is those two, you could just see this being almost the end of an era. This will be the last sort of boomer election before, we have a new election. I mean, I think if you're a Democrat, you're really nervous about Biden's vulnerabilities. If you're a Republican, you're thinking, if we nominate someone who's not Trump and not so polarizing, we have a shot. But are we going to do this to ourselves again? So there's a really lot of angst on both sides. You do wonder if a third party could emerge. Those typically, it's hard for a third party candidate to win, to get on first of all, get ballot access, and then to win. Ross Perot being the one that, was had the most success, in 92. But we'll see. I mean, it'll be an interesting thing, definitely, and I think it'll definitely be a polarizing election to be sure.
Well, we actually have one of our people that is an analyst here that is actually part of one of those third-party efforts. So David Walker, that is a former comptroller general for both Bush and Obama, and has done a lot of work here on Pod TV, is a leader within that no label campaign. So he is definitely one of the forefront people behind that. And I know that other people, including Manchin, have kind of jumped on that. So that might be one that is a possibility, of a strong possibility, because of their leadership people that are coming out within that movement.
Yeah, you think so? I mean, Joe Manchin is an intriguing thing, that if he ran third party, could he get traction? He's pretty pro-life, conservative on some things, progressive on other things. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think if you have Trump versus Biden, you're going to have a lot of conversation about a third party candidate. If you have someone on the Republican side that emerges that's not Trump, maybe there's not as much of that conversation. But yeah, we're in an interesting place right now with this country, because I do feel like we are sort of where we were in the late 70s, where a lot of people had almost sort of were cynical about the future of the country, and our best days behind us. And whether or not you love Ronald Reagan or not, I'm a huge fan of Reagan, but not everyone is. But Reagan sort of came along and talked about morning in America again, and got people to start believing in the country again. I do think whoever it is that's running, they obviously have to channel the grievances of their constituency, right? But I do think they need to take it upon themselves to say, okay, how do we get Americans to really believe in their country again? Besides diagnosing all the issues and problems, and there are many, how do we get Americans to believe in this American experiment again? And I wish more of our leaders saw that as one of their missions, to not just talk about issues which are important, and not just channel the grievances of their constituencies and their bases, left and right, but to say, hey, how do we get people to believe in this country again? To believe that this is a good experiment, an imperfect experiment, one that has, we have grievous national sins like, slavery and Jim Crow and racism and other things that we've had to work through, and we've made progress, but we still have a long way to go. But how do we get people to believe in the country again? I think there's such a cynicism on both sides, that our best days are behind us. And how do we talk about things like virtue again, that, developing moral virtue. So we'll see what happens. I don't see the parties really incentivizing that. There's not a lot of incentive to talk about those things, but I wish we had leaders that really did anyways.
Yeah, I think Lee had a question.
Yeah, I had a question. First of all, welcome. I really enjoy listening to you and your thoughts. Thank you very much. On your views on abortion, you said you're pro-life. I'm assuming that means from conception. How do you answer those who call for an exception for rape where the woman never consented to have sex?
Well, I mean, I personally believe that every child is made in the image of God, and we shouldn't punish children for the circumstances of their conception. But I do think that for many people, the exceptions are important in terms of passing some of these laws. And so as a pro-life person, I'm willing to work to say whatever restrictions we can get that we can pass that are passable, that are important. And I think even some of the restrictions that we put on that are not full bans on abortion will reduce quite a bit the number of abortions. So I think we have to be sensitive when we're talking about things like the life of the mother, because there is a case where, ethically, where if the mother's life is in danger, where both mother and child will perish if you go forward with the delivery, that you do have to make an ethical decision to save the life of the mother. Those are rare cases, but I do think you have to have those options open. And, those are hard and difficult cases. But I also think we have to have those exceptions. I think we have to make it clear that, and the pro-life community has never equated ectopic pregnancies or miscarriages with abortion. We've always had that as a separate category. But I think we need to make that doubly clear, that women who suffer from those things are not in danger of getting care because of these pro-life laws. I think we have to sort of double down on that so women feel safe when they come for those rare but very, very real circumstances,
Yep. Sasha, you had a thought or a question?
I have a question. Okay, Daniel, you just said earlier that you admire former President Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. And if you remember, his foreign policy was based, he first exposed United Soviet Union as the evil empire. And he was very articulate about it. And actually, he was probably one of the main reasons why Soviet Union ceased to exist in 1991. So where has happened the change in Republican viewpoint coming up to Trump saying that Putin is a best friend? We have to be friendly and we have to be nice with Russia and so on. Remember that Russia lost Third World War, which was a so-called a quiet war or silent war, or you can call it many, but it's lost it. Now, it was United States with its president at the time, George Bush Sr., who failed to engrave it in stone. Soviet Union lost. Period. The new world order coming in. They failed to do it and allow Russia in the last 20 years under the stewardship.
Yeah, I mean, those are good questions. I mean, okay. Go ahead. I thought you were finished. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think the U.S. should help Ukraine. I think the way that we're helping them, I actually wish we would do more in terms of sending more equipment, more supplies, quicker and faster. But I think the way that we're doing it is wise, that we're not committing ground troops because they're not a NATO ally, but they are an ally. I do think we have to keep our promises that when Ukraine got its independence, part of the deal was that Russia wouldn't attack them. We urged Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons. And then, of course, Russia violated that agreement. But we promised security guarantees. Excuse me. So I think it's in our strategic interest to help Ukraine because, we want to learn the lessons from World War II. If you let an aggressor march across Europe, pretty soon you're going to have a World War II. So I actually think helping Ukraine is not the pro-war position. I think helping Ukraine is actually the realist position, preventing World War III. And so I think blunting Russia in Ukraine keeps them from going to our NATO allies. I mean, one of the ways I explain this to people is I say, I'd rather we send help to Ukraine so that my son doesn't have to fight in Poland, right? Because if they invade Poland or the other countries, we have to commit troops. I also think it's a signal to China to that, hey, don't go into Taiwan. Don't think about that. In terms of Republicans, there is a kind of a return of the sort of. It's interesting how history repeats itself. There's a kind of return of a Taft isolationist wing in the Republican Party. It is small. I mean, if you look at polls, 70% of Republicans support helping Ukraine. So it is a few folks in positions of power. I do think, even though I'm very pro Ukraine, I think we should continue to help them. I do think it's okay that we have some segment saying, "Hey, let's make sure we don't escalate this to a nuclear war." Let's, I think having the presence of people in the country who are nervous about conflict is always healthy to avoid a kind of rush to war that is, we saw this with the Iraq war, which I was for initially. There was such a kind of there wasn't a ton of enough dissent. But that being said, I think 70% of, rank and file Republicans really want us to help Ukraine and oppose Russia. I do
Daniel,
think.
very quick question.
Oh,
Hold on,
one
very
more
quick
thing.
question.
I do think all of this sort of goes together, though, because it's my opinion that, and I'm not a huge fan of Trump, to be honest with you, but I do think it's fair to say, had he been in office, I don't know that you would have seen the Afghanistan debacle. I think he did sign that unfortunate agreement, but I don't know that he would have let it escalate to the point where I think we would have kept our base there. And I think that Afghanistan collapse actually emboldened Putin. I think when Putin saw us, the way we retreated from Afghanistan, I think he saw that and said, "Hey, the U.S. is weak. They're retreating from the world. This is my moment." I think he saw Biden as weak. I really do.
He is weak.
And I think he saw the weakness and he exploited that. Again, I'm not a huge fan of Trump. I think if Trump's in the White House, things might have gone differently. Now, hindsight's 2020, and that was, Trump lost that race, and that's on him. But all that being said, I do think we need to support Ukraine. We should hope that they can push Russia out. Russia, we need to remember that Russia attacked a sovereign nation. Russia's committing atrocities every day. Russia has violated their agreements. And so, it's not pro-war to help a nation defend themselves. Ukraine is trying to defend their country, defend their right to exist. So it's not pro-war to support that. But there are legitimate concerns that folks have who say, let's make sure this doesn't escalate. Let's make sure there's accountability for what we send over there. I mean, those are all valid concerns that we should not dismiss.
So you make the parallel, because I did see the Israel flag behind you and everything. So you make the same parallel between, say, Ukraine and Israel, because Israel is definitely an ally and is definitely under attack from some of its neighbors. So would you make that the same parallel that Ukraine and Israel are in similar situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think Israel, as much as I'm pro-Ukraine, I think Israel's in an obviously different category of ally, just because they've been longstanding allies. They're one of the, I shouldn't say the only, but they're probably the strongest democracy there in the Middle East. Israel has to have their own country because, this is historic, that if the Jewish people have seen that they can't always trust their host countries to protect them. Maybe it goes back to the Holocaust, that they had to have their own nation with its own unique Jewish character. And Israel is defending the right to exist against neighbors who want them not to exist. Now, thankfully, there's been a lot more peace in the region between Israel and a lot of the Arab countries with the Abraham Accords. It's a really good thing, but they're still under threat from people who want to wipe them into the sea. I think the U.S.'s support of Israel is never a blank check like it is with any country. I think there's times where, just because we support Israel doesn't mean we support every single thing their government does all the time. But I do think it's in our strategic interest to support them. And, the Holocaust was only 80 years ago, and we forget that, anti-Semitism is a scourge in every generation. Israel has the right to exist as a country, and so I think we need to support that.
That makes sense. The one thing I was going to say, and I know we're winding down, I don't know if anybody else has any questions, but if you could share your thoughts about the book. I know we're going to have in about another 5 minutes, Russia, Ukraine, and China, that Sasha will be hosting that show as he does every Tuesday and Friday. But if you want to expound on any other issues that we didn't get to and your thoughts just about the book, then it will definitely give you that opportunity.
Yeah, so I've written a number of books, and previous books have kind of been written to, talk about polarization in society. My book Way with Words talks about civility. This book is Agents of Grace. It's a plea to really Christians to be unified, and coming from the Christian scriptures and Christian doctrine that talks about being unified, and really talking to Christians about what are the issues worth fighting for. What are the things worth fighting for? What are the things where we can have disagreements, but be open-handed? And, I'm writing to Christians to say that, Jesus said that the world would know that we are with him, that we are followers of Jesus, based on the way we treat each other. And so in the last few years, that hasn't been the case. Christians have been as divisive as any others. And we need to return to Jesus' words to say that the way that we treat each other should be a witness to a world, to say, I don't understand Christianity. I don't know what they believe, but man, the way that they love each other is really different. And we need to return to that. And I talk about forgiveness. I talk about reconciliation, all those things. So it's called Agents of Grace. I want to encourage folks to get it wherever books are sold. But love talking with you guys. It's been a great conversation.
Definitely
Thank
love
you.
it as well. Last quick question I had is just along those same lines is, sometimes the church is even divided on its own issues. So it sounds like me like that book is dealing with that, whether it's women leadership or whether it's divorce or a number of other things. So it seems like that's part of what the book is addressing, is how these are issues that are talked about in the church, but you can agree to disagree, even as we agree to disagree sometimes here on this platform and everything. But that seems to be one of the bases of what the book is. And you even mentioned how you and Reverend Barbara may not agree on a lot of things, but y'all do have some common ground in the fact of being both Christian leaders.
Yeah. Basically, how do we have deep differences, but how do we find common ground? And I think that's important.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
I'm sorry, David, can you bottle that and send it to Washington?
Seriously. I mean, I wrote an op-ed for USA Today a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, this mass shooting issue, man, we need Republicans, Democrats to get together and say, what is doable? What can we do? Okay, we have a Second Amendment. We're always going to have that. We have a Constitution. But what can we do to help stop this? What are the different things we could be doing? And again, on this issue and others, there's just an incentive to not get together. There's an incentive to just sort of be polarized. But I think the more we ask our leaders to say, hey, can you work together to solve the major issues that are plaguing us?
Seems they don't want to, whether it's guns, immigration, healthcare, nothing.
Right. No, you're right. I mean, I think
there's a
part of
reason
it
for
is
that.
because the most activist people are the ones who are most involved. And so they will listen to the most active people. I think people who do want partnership and cooperation need to speak up and be involved more. Otherwise, it'll be left to the extremes, if you will.
So do you think there'll ever be a day, and I'm just going to tease you as we're walking out the door, that we'll actually see maybe AOC and Trump sit down, even though I did hear that there were some conversations among even like AOC and Nikki that were agreeing on some issues, or maybe even a day that you and Reverend Barbara will sit down and find that the common ground and everything.
Perhaps we'll see. But I appreciate the conversation, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate that.
No, definitely appreciate it as well. We're getting ready to get on out of here. Daniel, if you had any parting thoughts that you want to give, then I'll leave you a minute. But then otherwise, we're going to get out of here, and we'll have the Russian, Ukraine, China shows that'll be coming our way at exactly 11 o'clock.
Well, I just want to say, I want folks to check out this book, Agents of Grace, How to Bridge Divides, Love as Jesus Loves, and check out my work at my website is danieldarling.com. You could read me at World Magazine, USA Today, other places, and check me on social media as well. But great to be on the show, y'all.
Pleasure meeting you. God
We'd love
bless.
to have you back again at some time when you're available. But definitely, I've appreciated it and glad that I found you through RTIR and some of the other sources, including your literary agent. So definitely glad to have you on, and hopefully we'll have a chance to get you back on in the near future.
Well, thank you, sir.
Nice to agree with someone on this program.